Hmm.
A civilization charting stars with such, well, incredible accuracy, building cities that still just blow you away.
Absolutely.
Yet the reasons why they're big cities, especially in the South, seem to sort of fade around the same time. Still a bit of a puzzle.
It really is.
That's the world of the Maya. And it's what we're going to explore together, digging into these fascinating sources you've shared.
Looking forward to it.
Our goal for this deep dive
Uh-huh.
is really to get a handle on the key parts of their civilization.
Right.
You know, from those early farming days, maybe around 2000 BCE,
Yeah, way back.
through their peak in the Classic period, the changes later, the impact of the Spanish arriving in the 16th century,
A huge turning point.
and what their legacy actually means today. So, ready to jump in.
Definitely. And you know, what's really striking when you look at the sources on their beginnings
Mm.
is that this complex society, it didn't just pop up overnight.
Right, it takes time.
It was gradual, started with these small farming communities. Then, over centuries, maybe by about 1000 BCE, you start seeing signs of, well, more complex social structures forming.
Okay.
It wasn't just villages anymore. There was a definite move towards, hierarchy, established roles.
Okay, so let's dig into that hierarchy, especially during that Classic period you mentioned, like 250 CE to 900 CE, when things were really flourishing.
Exactly, the peak for many areas.
What did that structure look like? And what about this Ajah figure the sources mentioned? How significant were they?
Right, the Classic period, you see these amazing city-states like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Calakmul really hitting their stride.
Yeah, the famous ones.
And at the top of each of these city-states, these independent kingdoms really, was the Ajah, the king.
Okay.
But they weren't just like political bosses. Their power had this deep religious side to it.
Okay.
They were seen as semi-divine, kind of a crucial connection between the people and the gods, the spiritual world.
So a really central figure then.
Absolutely. And then below them, you had the nobles, probably handling administration, government, maybe military leadership.
So when we picture Mayan society,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't all just farming, right?
Yeah.
What other roles were key?
Oh, definitely not just farming. There was a clear division of labor, different social levels.
Like
Well, scribes were incredibly important, the keepers of knowledge, you could say.
recording everything.
Yeah, writing down history, religious texts, and importantly, those super precise astronomical observations we talked about.
Boy,
Then you had the priests, another powerful group. Their focus was maintaining that relationship with the gods, performing rituals, understanding the complex calendars.
okay.
Artisans, too, highly valued. Think about the amazing buildings, the artwork, the jewelry. They needed skilled people for that.
True.
And then, yes, the majority, the base of society, were the farmers, growing the food that fed everyone. But all these roles were linked, vital for the city-states to function.
It really paints a picture of a dynamic, really organized society.
Wow.
And speaking of feeding everyone, the sources highlight their farming skills. Maize, beans, squash, chili peppers.
The staples.
Yeah, the core of their diet. And even tied into their mythology, I think.
Very much so. Maize especially had huge cultural and religious weight.
And what about this slash and burn technique for clearing land? What does that tell us about how they manage their environment?
Well, their farming knowledge was definitely sophisticated. They made the tropical environment work for them.
Right.
Slash and burn was a practical way to clear the jungle for fields. But,
There's always a but.
well, yeah, as populations grew, relying heavily on that method might have caused long-term problems.
Like deforestation.
Exactly. Deforestation, soil erosion, things that could maybe contribute to challenges later on. It makes you wonder about sustainability over centuries.
Interesting point. Okay, beyond farming, the architecture. It's
Yeah.
just stunning.
Isn't it?
The scale, the precision of the pyramids, temples, palaces. It's hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
Truly monumental.
And then the ball courts, what was their deal? Just for sports.
Oh, much more than sports. They were deeply tied into their religious and political life.
Really?
Yeah, the games played there often had symbolic meaning, maybe reenacting myths, creation stories, battles between gods.
Wow.
And the outcomes could be serious, sometimes even involving ritual sacrifice.
Intense.
And you're right about the architecture integrating knowledge. Think about El Castillo at Chichen Itza.
The serpent shadow?
Exactly. The way it lines up perfectly on the equinoxes, making it look like a snake is slithering down the stairs.
Incredible.
It's such a powerful example of their astronomical knowledge and how they built it right into their monuments. Shows that deep connection between the cosmos and their world.
That serpent detail, yeah, it's such a vivid picture
Mm,
of that connection. And it wasn't just buildings showing off their artistry, was it?
not at all.
The sources also talk about colorful textiles, fancy jewelry, and those amazing murals and stone carvings.
Right, their art was everywhere, and it reflected their whole worldview, their social structure.
How so?
Well, cotton textiles, often dyed with these really rich natural colors, probably showed your status, and they were traded too.
Okay.
And the elaborate jade jewelry, the feathered headdresses,
Hmm.
they weren't just pretty, they carried symbolic weight linked to certain gods or ranks in society.
I see.
And the murals, the carved stone slabs, the stele, they were like visual records telling stories of history, religion, rulers. Super valuable for us to understand them.
Which kind of leads us right into their spiritual beliefs.
Very complex.
The sources mention a polytheistic religion, lots of gods and goddesses. Itzamna is a big one.
Yes, Itzamna is often seen as a principal creator god, sort of presiding over the others. But the pantheon was huge. Gods for the sun, rain, corn, death, everything.
And priests and shamans were pretty influential then, acting as go-betweens.
Hugely influential. They held a lot of social and political power. Their job was to read omens, lead the rituals needed to keep the cosmos balanced, make sure things went well.
Keep the gods happy.
Essentially, yes. And understanding those intricate calendar cycles was key to that.
The sources even mention using hallucinogenic stuff in some rituals.
Yeah.
Mushrooms, tobacco.
Yes, that seems to have been part of certain ceremonies. The belief was likely that these substances help them connect with the spirit
And
worlds.
get insights.
Oh,
Or communicate.
something like that. A way to sort of bridge the gap between the human and the divine realms.
The sources also talk about bloodletting, especially among the nobility.
Mm.
That sounds, well, pretty intense from our perspective.
It does, and it's important to understand it in their context.
Right.
Blood was seen as this incredibly potent life force. Offering it, particularly the blood of the elite, the rulers, was considered a very powerful sacrifice, a way to nourish the gods, maintain the cosmic order.
So not necessarily seen as brutal, but as a duty.
More like a sacred duty, yeah. A way for rulers to show their connection to the divine, their piety. Sacrificing prisoners of war also happened, often tied to big religious or political moments, again, embedded in their belief system.
It really highlights a very different way of seeing the world, that relationship between humans and the divine.
Absolutely.
And besides these, grand rituals, the sources point to a deep connection with nature, too. Animal spirits, omens.
Definitely. The natural world wasn't separate from the spiritual for them. It was all interwoven.
Jaguars, snakes, birds seem important.
Very much so. Animals were often linked to specific gods or thought to hold spiritual power themselves.
So watching a jaguar could be a sign.
Potentially, yes. Or certain birds might be messengers. The jaguar was often linked to power, royalty, even the underworld. This connection with nature was fundamental.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to something the Maya are maybe most famous for, highlighted in your sources, the calendar system.
Ah, yes, truly remarkable.
We've got the Zolkin, the Hob, and then the long count, which always stirs up talk. Can you break those down for us?
Sure, it was an incredibly sophisticated system showing amazing math and astronomy skills.
So the Zolkin first.
Right. The Tzolk'in was a 260-day sacred calendar, likely used for divination, figuring out auspicious days for rituals. Each day had a unique combo of a number, 113, and a name, 20 different day names.
Okay, 260 days. And the Hob.
The Hob was their 365-day solar calendar, much closer to our year, linked to the seasons, agriculture. It had 18 months of 20 days each, plus a tricky 5-day period at the end considered unlucky.
Right, and they work together somehow.
Exactly, that's the ingenious part. The Tzolk'in and Hob cycles mesh together. A specific date combination, like 4 Aha, 8 Kumku, wouldn't repeat for 52 Hob years.
Wow, 52 years.
Yeah, that 52-year cycle is called the calendar round. It was a very precise way to track time within a sort of generational time frame.
That's already pretty complex. And then there's the long count. Your sources suggest that was for, the really big picture.
Precisely. The long count was different. It was linear. It tracked time continuously from a mythical starting point way back in the past.
How'd it work?
It used mostly a base 20 system to count days, grouping them into larger and larger cycles, kins, days, winals, 20 days, tons, 360 days, katuns, 20 tons, and baktons, 20 katuns, about 394 years.
Okay, getting complicated again.
It is, but it allowed them to date events over vast stretches of history. And this is the calendar tied to the whole 2012 thing,
Ah, yes, the end of the world idea.
which was a total misinterpretation.
Right.
What actually happened in December